Hello everyone and welcome back to another Stradigoy video. We have returned with our War Scroll breakdown for the Lumineth Realm-Lords index of AOS 4. In this part 3 today we're doing Aalen and Alarith. The last two parts, the scenario part and the Venari part, I've done with Siegfried, and Siegfried will also be joining us for the last part about the Huracan. But here for the Alarith, it's just Jonas here going solo for a little bit. But you can be sure that we'll deliver the same content that you're used to by now. So let's dive right in. So if you haven't picked up on the series so far, you guys, Ryan, Siegfried and I, we did an index review where we covered all of the rules except for specific War Scrolls. I think we only tackled about 6 War Scrolls. And I really wanted to do a full breakdown of all the War Scrolls in our index because it's a new edition and everything's a little bit different now. There's a much bigger difference now than there was, for example, changing from the 2nd edition code battle tome to the 3rd edition battle tome. So that's why we're doing these breakdowns now. We've done part 1 where we covered Teclis, Aalen and Elthor and all the Scenari. And we've done part 2 where we tackle Eltharion and the Venari. If you're curious about the Yggdrasil and Riverblades, they are also in the part 1 scenario video. Next, in a couple of days, you're gonna get the Huracan video with Severith, but today we're doing Aalen and his Alarith boys. Now, when we're giving you some Stradigoy content, we always try to give you more in-depth stuff than you might be used to. There's some phenomenal coverage out there already by fantastic YouTubers and other content creators that have made these War Scroll reviews or index reviews where it's just the PDF review. And that's very nice content already. We try to, go a little bit further than that, so you at least get some new stuff out of this as well. And one of the things that we want to try and give you for these breakdowns is a 1 to 5 star rating. Now keep in mind it's a pretty rough rating because 5 stars obviously can't cover all of the nuances. But it's also very early days. It's still the first week when I'm recording this of the index release. We haven't actually played a lot of games or any games at this point, so it's mostly going by my experience with Lumineth and what I've learned and picked up from Ryan's mathematical approach, for example, and what I've seen and read on the Discord and what I chatted about with you guys, for example. So when I'm giving out the ratings, I'm going to go by these 5-star ratings. 1 star would mean that you best avoid picking this unit and putting it in your list is probably, kind of slowing yourself down a little bit. Like the Ballista or the Lore Seeker feels like a very weird War Scroll to put in any list at this point. A 2-star unit is actually fine though to put in a list. It's just suboptimal, and by that I mean there's either a unit that does something better for the same price or that does the same thing for a cheaper price. Then we move on to the 3-star units. These are decent, but mostly in specific situations. So, for example, an Alarith Spirit of the Mountain will probably only be decent in a pretty good Alarith force, though that one might have been a bad example, as we will see in a little bit. 4 stars is a unit that's great in most situations, and a 5-star unit is an amazing unit, and that's something that you should consider putting in every list. For example, so far we've covered the Dawn Riders, for example, and I feel like that's a unit that you need to consider putting in every list so far. Right, so let's start off with the big boy himself, Aalen, the Stoneheart King. He comes in at a whopping 410 points right now. If you bring him as your hero, you can put any Wardens and any Alarith in your regiment. And he's also a War Master, meaning that he has to become your general unless you have a different War Master. And the only 2 other options for that are either Severith or Teclis. I actually feel like Aalen is actually a pretty good general. He's sturdy, he's tanky, he can take a beating, which are all synonyms, I guess. So you'd be well off having him as your general, and it's hard to take him down in one round. Definitely harder than taking down Teclis, for example. His damage is also pretty nasty. The Fire Stealer hammers are actually very nice. We'll see some stats after we've covered the normal cow. And he has an inbuilt ward save now, which is, you know, a nice quality of life change. A 6-up ward's not gonna turn any heads by any means, but it's nice compared to what we had before. Like, there was no ward, and while the Alarith part of our army was always the tanky part, it also felt like we got really punished by mortal wounds or mortal damage at this point. Now, there is fewer mortal damage in the game, so that actually makes all the Alarith stuff even more potent now, because they've got good saves, and they are, if you use a Facet of War, they ignore 1 rend. And Aalen even has a chance of ignoring 2 rend, but we'll get to that in a little bit. He's also one of the 2 units that can actually buff Stone Guards. Him and the Stone Mage can do so. Now, his buff is actually the only one that's gonna have a major impact. The extra rend that the Stone Mage doles out is also pretty good. But you'll see in the graphs in a little bit that for the Stone Guard, it doesn't really matter as much as the +1 attack does that Aalen gives out. He is quite expensive though. Keep that in mind, that if you're going for a combined arms attachment, as in not a full Alarith force, or just throwing him in there on top of some, you know, random other stuff, you're paying for this whole shebang, right? And 410 points is a lot to pay for a unit if you're not, you know, getting the best out of Unshakable Faith of the Mountains, for example, his command ability. So try to maximize his usefulness by bringing some synergistic units with him as well. I do want to point out though that I do feel like the stongs on the Stone Mage have gone down a little bit. Him and the Mountain Spirit still have that ability where the Stone Mage Symbiosis, where they count as you know, unharmed and not bracketed if the Stone Mage is wholly within 12 inches. Now, in the previous book, that was actually huge because Aalen bracketed quite harshly, and the normal Spirit of the Mountain did so as well. I do feel like the battle damage profile here, losing 2 attacks on the Fire Steel Hammers, is not as bad. I mean, it's still 8 damage, but you'd have to have lost at least 10 health already. So that's something to keep in mind. That is it actually worth bringing a Stone Mage if you're tight for points? And you're always going to be tight for points because things have gotten really expensive. Every list that I've built so far feels very elite, and I barely have points left for any screens, even if there are actually any screens in the game left. Let's also quickly look at his Rampage ability, because there's no normal monsters actions anymore, so you've only got, or monsters rampages, so you only get these rampages. And the Rampage keyword actually doesn't do anything in the rules so far, but it might in the future. So it's a once per turn army ability, which is fine because there's no other unit in the army that has the same ability. And you could use it both in your combat phase as well as in your opponent's. But keep in mind, if this unit did not charge this turn, is the declaration step. So that's a little bit similar to his previous profile, where he also got a bonus for not having charged. And it's thematic, you know, he's a walking mountain. It's cool that he has to sit still, but it usually feels a little bit wrong as well. Because sure, you get this ability, but only on a 2+. That's still, you know, quite a big chance. So a good chance that it goes off. You subtract 1 from the rend characteristic of the target's melee weapon, so only 1 unit that you're in combat with, not all the units that you're in combat with, for example. And this unit gets an extra attack both on his Fire Stealer Hammers and the Cloven Hoofs. Pretty nice buff, not gonna lie. I think it's very thematic as well, but you don't necessarily have to wait for it. We will see in a graph in a little bit that his damage is also pretty nice outside of his abilities or without his ability. So you can definitely go ahead and take the charge if you want to. So as I said, the Stone Mage, he's a little bit in a meh position for me. That's why he got 2 stars compared to the better rating for Aalen. His Stone Mage stance is pretty weird, I feel. It's very restrictive, and the reward that you get for rolling a 3+ isn't that amazing. So you pick 1 friendly Alarith Elf unit, so that's hopefully a bunch of Stone Guards, wholly within 12 inches of this unit. And after you've done that, you still need to roll a dice, and then 67% of the time, you get to add 1 rend to that target's melee weapons for the rest of the turn, so not until your next turn. I don't feel like this is worth it at all. You'll see in the graph in a little bit that it makes very little difference. His spell is pretty good though, the Living Fissure. Depending on how you can set it up, 18 inches is quite generous. And if you roll well, it does some work. And you know, him being on a 4+ save, ignoring a rend is always nice, of course. But I think if you're going for an Alarith battalion or regiment, you're probably bringing Aalen, and I feel like you could squeeze in enough Alarith units so that you don't actually have to bring an Alarith Stone Mage yourself. But if you're going full Alarith, I don't think you're going to leave home without her. But otherwise, I do encourage you to try a list without her and see whether you actually needed her to begin with, because there's really good Scenari units out there as well that would do you know, a similar thing for the exact same cost or even cheaper. So that's something to consider. Onto the Alarith Spirit of the Mountain then. So this guy got really basic, to be honest. He can be brought in all of the named heroes regiments, which is cool, and then also with a Stone Mage, obviously. He moved to 330 points. I am not completely sure whether that's a fair you know, point cost for him. If you compare him to Altharion's damage output, for example, it's almost exactly the same. Altharion obviously has fewer wounds, but he has a ward save. He has a ward of 5 instead of 6, and he has an unrendable 3-up, while this one only ignores 1 rend with a specific facet of war on top of that. So something to consider there, especially because his rampage ability, which is the thing that you get for him being a monster and thus never being able to get any cover bonuses, is only triggering on a 4+ and only if this unit did not charge. So I do feel like this is super restrictive, and it should have been a lower dice roll. It should have been on a 2 or a 3 if there's that condition of not having charge, because now you're sitting around, you're gonna let your opponent activate something first. Unless you roll that 4-up, obviously, then one of your opponent's units has strike loss, but maybe not even all of them. So once again here, there is the consideration whether you also need the Stone Mage to keep this guy healthy. He actually loses only 1 attack, so it's only 5 damage. Sure, it's still 25% of his output on the World Hammer. But, you know, you're bumping up that price tag from 330 to 480 for just this cow guy with another smaller guy on a floating stone. I don't see the value of bringing a Stone Mage just for the Alarith Spirit of the Mountain. That being said, it's still a super cool model. If there is a place in the rule set where monsters are actually worth more, it's nice. Obviously, he has more health than Altharion, so he's a little bit more tanky. He has a better control score as well. And, you know, you could really approach this guy with the attitude of, you know, it's a throw it in there kind of monster. Like you have some points left over and you want a big guy in there. He could fulfill that role for you. You don't necessarily need the ignoring rent. You don't necessarily need the Stone Mage support. He does what he does for your army, and you're not paying for any buffs to your other Alarith units. So you're just paying for his profile, and if you like the profile, you can definitely bring him. There is just to consider the consideration, like for 330 points, does he have enough impact on your game? That's just one thing that you have to consider. Let's look at some stats then. Of course, Aalen is much more expensive than the normal cow. About 100 points more expensive, 80 to be exact. But you can really see here in the damage values that it sometimes makes a big difference, but not always. I would say versus good saves, like a 2-up or a 3-up save, it's about 1 damage or 1.5 damage difference. So again, as I said, you're paying for Avalenor's buffs as well. So if you're only looking for a damage monster, you should probably bring the Spirit of the Mountain. Now, if we get the buffs from Avalenor's Bulwark ability, So him receiving a charge and then rolling a die to trigger the +1 attack and lowering the opponent's rend, then the difference is more noticeable. But even then, against, you know, a 4-up save, which is not out of this world to imagine that you're gonna be faced off with, and then adding a all-out attack on top of that. So let's say the usual save will, you know, hover between a 3 and a 4-up when being hit by these monsters. Their damage is still kind of alike. So yeah, it's just something to consider. I also put the stats for Eltharion's unbuffed normal attacks up there, and if you compare those with the Mountain Spirit, for example, so also no buffs on the Mountain Spirit, only melee damage. For Eltharion, the same thing, only melee output. You can see it's almost exactly the same. So hardly any difference there. So if you're tight for points, Eltharion is probably a safer pick. Obviously, Eltharion has fewer wounds, but, you know, you can stick Eltharion in the Shrine Luminor, and that gives him the Shrine Luminor extra wounds. I think it's 12 extra health. Sorry, not wounds, health. And he can charge with that. He can do all these shenanigans. He can be set up within range of the Shrine Luminor and then set up outside of it again. So if you want to get some Shrine Luminor tactics, definitely check out our index review. We go in depth there on the terrain piece, and we figure out that it's really quite gimmicky if you want it to be. So there's that to consider. And then on to our last Alarith unit. It's going to be a quickie for this specific video. It's the Alarith Stone Guard. Now, I've always wanted these units to be amazing. I'm not completely sure where they sit right now. They suffer from the same kind of weaknesses that they suffered from in the previous books, where they're just god darn slow. 4 inches is really, really slow, and obviously you can put Speed of Hish on multiple units now. So for them, it's still effectively doubling their movement to 8. But even then, you're left questioning, like, is that enough? Now, with the way our index is set up, I do feel like there's more of a place for an Alarith detachment, 1 regiment of Alarith units as your backfield holders, because they're pretty good at that. Because Fortitude of the Earth, for example, giving them an award save only triggers if you contest that objective and if you already control it. Now, control only triggers at the end of the turn. Thus, that means that you either have that objective because you deployed on it, or you had it from the previous turn as well. So keep that in mind if you're using these guys as your hammer units and you're using them proactively, so you're running them up and charging them in on an objective. You're not getting a ward because you cannot control that objective until the end of that turn. So it's something to keep in mind. Their damage isn't really amazing without any buffs. They are 130, so they're a little bit cheaper than our other Venari infantry units. Only by 10 points though. But if they're in an Alarith army and you've got Avallenor and you've maybe even got a Stone Mage, they soak up those 2 buffs quite well, and they do amazing stuff with those buffs, especially against low save or bad save units. Let's look at some stats for the Stone Guard here. So 5 Stone Guard with no buffs. This is also not counting the extra champion attack, just to clarify. Do about 6 damage to a 4-up save. Not amazing, but, you know, it's only 5 Stone Guard. It's 130 points. It doesn't have to be amazing. If you add the rent on top of that, you almost get 1.5 wounds extra. But the difference becomes quite noticeable when you add the attack on top of it instead of the rent. That's more of a difference already. And then if you do both of them, it's actually getting to quite a nice number. So for example, a unit of 10 Stone Guards with both of those buffs on them would almost deal 20 damage to a 3-up save unit, or a 4-up save unit with all out defense, for example. So that's quite a lot of damage, guys, for 260 points. So if you get the buffs off, it's a really, really fancy and fantastic unit to have in your back pocket. So that's something to keep in mind for the Stone Guard, that if you have the points to buff them and the units nearby, then they're definitely worth your investment. Okay, now obviously we have to compare them to some other units that are similarly priced. So all of these units are priced at either 130 for the Stone Guard or 140 for the Wardens and the Blade Lords. And then here you can see, especially in the graph below, you can really see the magic of buffed up Stone Guard. So if they're not buffed, you can see that they almost perform worse for most stats. Now the Blade Lords get specifically worse against bad saves, and the Stone Guards get better against bad saves. Wardens have this slow grow, and I love that for Wardens because they're just so with their attacks and their mortal wounds, they're such a nice unit that inches on upwards just for because of the weight of dice. Now for the Stone Guards, specifically with all the buffs, you can really see the difference here, guys. So it's still 5 Stone Guard here. The light green bars is still 5 Stone Guard, but with both buffs on. If you compare to Blade Lords with both buffs on, so also +1 rend, and they get a Parafish, while the Stone Guard only need to get a buff from Aalen, you can see that it really makes a huge difference. So Stone Guard actually perform much better than any of our other infantry with buffs. Something to keep in mind, you do have to bring Aalen, obviously, so there is a price tag attached to it. That being said, his ability doesn't cost you anything except for a CP, except for a command point, while for the Wardens and the Blade Lords, you need to use your Facet of War Parafish, thus meaning you're missing out on another choice of your Facets of War. So you can also only do it on 1 unit. So that's something to keep in mind. 20 Stone Guards, so 2 × 10 with Aalen in a regiment and possibly a Stone Mage or just a generic cow, I think is a really strong regiment. Or you could just opt for Aalen, 2 × 5 Stone Guard and 1 × 10 Stone Guard. Maybe even make him your General's Regiment if you wanted to. And you could put priority target on those Stone Guard to buff both their hits and their wounds, since they have no auto wounding stuff going on. That's actually a really nice buff to put on their War Scroll as well. So that's something to add on top of that. Right, guys, and that already brings us to the end of this video. So this was a quickie because I'm rolling solo today. It's obviously less of a conversation and more of me just talking to my screen. I still hope that you've enjoyed this breakdown of the Alarith stuff. I fully expect my opinion on some of these War Scrolls to change throughout the months of playing. So far, I'm a little bit iffy on the Alarith. I don't know where they sit because I haven't had good experiences with them in the past. That being said, mortal damage has gone down. We have a lot of fast units, so I can really see the benefit of having, an Alarith core as your defensive block and then maybe a Huracan to control the field and score your battle tactics. So that's still a thing that you can do now, and you do it better than ever before. If you have some questions or if you've enjoyed the content, please leave a comments down below. Comments are really the best way to show us that you care. Leaving a like also gets us picked up by the algorithm. So if you want to show your love or your gratitude for this content, that's the easiest and nicest thing that you can do for us mostly. Subscribing is also great because then you get to stay in touch for part 4 and for the other content. So I've been working on this Lumineth content because I'm on holiday when this is released, and I wanted to get this out there as soon as I could. But Ryan's already brainstorming new ideas for different indexes and armies as well. So if you're curious about non-Lumineth stuff, it's also coming because I'm gonna let Lumineth sleep for a little bit now. I'm gonna play a bunch out of it, but I've covered what I wanted to cover, and I can move on to some different coverage when I return from the holidays. If you want to chat with me or Siegfried about any of the previous content or ask Ryan about any mathematical stuff or other army stuff, you can definitely check us out in the Discord and we can continue the conversation there. Guys, thank you once again so much for watching, and I hope to see you for part 4. Bye-bye.